Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Haley Paul, and I'm an Outreach and Communications Associate with Mid-Atlantic TAB. Welcome to today's webinar, the Fiscal Year 2026 EPA Brownfields Grant Guidelines Overview for West Virginia, where you'll get to hear from the experts and ask them all of your EPA Brownfield-related questions. A few quick notes. There will be time allotted for Q&A, so please make note of any questions that come up during the presentation, or feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout. Additionally, a recording of this presentation and the slides will be made available. As I said, I'm Haley, and here soon you'll be hearing from Catherine and Katie, who are also with Mid-Atlantic TAB and respectively based at Marshall University and West Virginia University. A little bit about Mid-Atlantic TAB. We are the technical assistance provider for EPA Region 3, which includes Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, of course, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. We'll talk about the resources and services we offer later in the presentation. One of the resources we do offer is Brownfield Education, an example of which is today's webinar. Also contributing to this presentation are Chris and Dawn with EPA Region 3, and Aaron and Jennifer with the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection. If you missed our first webinar in this series, you can check out the slides and recording for more details about each Brownfield grant application, including threshold, narrative, and meeting requirements, as well as eligible activities. Finally, here's an overview of what's to come. You'll hear about a general overview of EPA Brownfield grants and eligibility. You'll hear about SAM.gov and application threshold criteria, FY26 MAC grant changes, grant packages, key information, and some additional TAB resources, as well as a time for questions. With that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Catherine.
Thank you, Haley. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Catherine Gooding. I'm with the Brownfields Assistance Center at Marshall University. So I am going to start today just talking about a little overview of what the grants are that are available this year. So these Brownfield grants are also referred to as MARC grants, Multipurpose Assessment Revolving Loan Fund and Cleanup grants. Revolving loan funds and multipurpose grants alternate years, and this is a multipurpose year. So this year, those three you can see here, multipurpose, assessment, and cleanup are available. Next slide, please. A little timeline of what to expect in the application process. So applications are due on grants.gov in January, on January 28th, 2026. There is no extension on that, so that is the deadline. Then it goes through a couple of layers of review. So in February and March is the threshold eligibility review. We'll talk a little bit later about the threshold criteria. So that you go through those criteria, make sure you're eligible. If you don't get through this process, then you don't move forward. But as long as you get through the threshold eligibility, you move on to a national review. This is where your application goes to reviewers all over the country. So it's really crucial to make sure that you're telling the story of your community because your application could be read by someone from anywhere. And most likely they don't know the first thing about your little community here in West Virginia. So once the national review is completed, then it goes in May to the EPA Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization selection review, and that's where the final review and selection is done. And then in June is the selection announcement. Now, if you are awarded a grant, then your funds will become available in October. Next slide, please. Okay, so eligibility for all of the different kinds of grants. There are about 5 different kinds of applicants that are eligible. So any state, local, or tribal governments are eligible. Also general purpose units of local government, county governments, also municipalities, any of these local government entities. Regional councils or redevelopment agencies as sanctioned by the state. So any of your planning and development councils that the regions that you may be in, your local EDAs. Nonprofit organizations, this is excluding 501c4 organizations that lobby the federal government. those are not eligible. And then quasi-governmental agencies. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a table of anticipated funding for this year. You can see all the different kinds of grants that are available. Multi-purpose, these blend sort of assessment and cleanup activities. These have a maximum project period of 5 years, up to $1 million. Most of the applications or most of the grant types have a 4-year term. The only other one besides multi-purpose that does not is community-wide assessment grants for states and tribes, and that is also 5 years. You can see the maximum amount per grant here in this third column. Cleanup grants have 2 different levels this year. So there's a $500,000 level, and they're estimating 10 of those awards nationwide, and then a $4 million level of cleanup grants, and they're estimating 26 of those nationwide. Next slide, please. Okay, so eligibility for multiple applications. Sometimes we get questions, can I apply for 2 different grants in the same year? Generally speaking, the answer to that is no, with a few small exceptions. One of those has to be a cleanup grant, and then the other one would be some type of assessment grant. So either a community-wide assessment grant for states and tribes, a community-wide assessment grant, or you would have to be the lead on an assessment coalition grant. Otherwise, you are not eligible to apply for multiple grants in the same year. Next slide, please. And then finally, in terms of eligibility, sometimes we get other questions that are, maybe I have a previous application, but I want to apply for another one. And generally speaking, this is possible. A good rule of thumb is you are eligible as long as you've drawn down 70% of the funds from your previous grant. So that specifically relates to multipurpose grants and assessment grants. If you've had an assessment grant in the past that's still open, you have to have drawn down 70% of that to be eligible to apply for another grant. Next slide, please. All right, so I'll pass it over to Katie to talk about SAM.gov.
Thanks, Catherine. So my name is Katie here at the WVU office. So we want to stress the importance of your registration with SAM.gov. Apparently I can't speak this morning. SAM stands for the System for Award Management. It's an official website of the U.S. government. It is not through the EPA, but in order to actually apply for the EPA Brownfield Grant, you must have your SAM.gov registration. It is free to do so. You need to make sure that you do this now. So it's really important because it can take a while for the updates to take place. It can take up to 2 weeks. If there are some snags that you find along the way, sometimes multiple issues can take a little bit longer to resolve. So that's why we stress the importance of checking it now. So don't put this aside. Please go ahead and make sure that this is done. So we've provided a screenshot here. And if we can go to the next slide, please, Ms. Haley. So again, in order to actually apply for the grant, you're going to go through grants.gov, but to be able to do that, you must have your active SAM.gov registration. Any applicant for the EPA Brownfield Grant must also have their unique entity ID. It's called the UEI. So again, make sure you're doing that now. Next slide. Thank you. So again, in order to register, you must have that UEI, your tax ID number, and your bank routing number or the account number that is going to be used should you get this grant. The SAM.gov account, it's not a one and done thing. You must renew it every 12 months. So if you haven't checked that in a while, please go ahead and do so. Again, do that now. It has to be active when applying for a grant. It may be that someone in your entity or organization already has an account. So if that's the case, you want to identify that person. Make sure that, first of all, they still work there. And second, make sure that they are still on board for being the contact. So you just want to make sure the name is correct as well as their contact information. And if any of that has changed or needs to change, again, that's what you need to do now. There is no fee to register for SAM.gov. There should never be a fee. So if you happen to see emails or any ads that say, hey, you know, pay us and we'll help you with SAM.gov, please don't fall for that. That is a scam. Reach out to us here at TAB and we would be happy to help you do that. And now it's time for our EPA friends.
Hi, my name is Christopher Lesniak. I'll be going over some threshold criteria, but just wanted to remind you about a procurement warning. So let's say you procured a qualified environmental professional, QEP, and they prepare your grant application. Just make sure that just because they prepared your grant application doesn't mean that they can be assigned your QEP for the rest of the grant automatically. Just remember, you still have to go through the competitive federal bid process. So just kind of give that kind of general warning before kind of starting that grant off, just to make sure that you follow the federal procurement regulations, and because this prevents a QEP from having an unfair competitive advantage from writing the application itself. Next slide, please. All right, so now we'll be diving into the threshold criteria section of this application. We won't go over each criteria in this presentation, but we'll highlight some main topics. So, threshold criteria for all grants. These criterion ensure you're eligible to receive a grant and are evaluated as a pass-fail basis. So if your application fails to meet the threshold requirements, the remaining portions of your application will not be evaluated. So it is really important to read the guidelines and carefully include answers to all the threshold questions, even if the answer seems obvious or is included in another section of your application. If for some reason the applicant is deemed ineligible because of failing threshold review, the applicant will be notified within 15 calendar days of the determination. Next slide, please. Assessment, multipurpose, and cleanup grants all require a current letter from your state environmental agency, West Virginia DEP, that acknowledges that you're planning to apply for the EPA Brownfields Grant and conduct brownfield activities. If you applied for a grant in the past, please note that previous letters are not accepted. A new letter from the state must be submitted that references this current application. For cleanup grants, the state letters are a little more involved. More details will be covered later during this presentation. To highlight some main points for the cleanup grant state letters, sites that are eligible to be enrolled in the voluntary response program, West Virginia DEP will determine if there's sufficient characterization or if further assessment is required to begin remediation. If it is determined additional assessment is needed, then the site must be sufficiently characterized by June 15th, 2026. Remember to coordinate early with West Virginia DEP so you'll receive the letter well before the application deadline. Next slide, please. Diving more into the cleanup grant threshold criteria on ownership eligibility. So applicants must own the site before submitting the application. Also, applicants must have done their due diligence before acquiring the site through conducting all appropriate inquiries with a phase 1 environmental site assessment that has been completed or updated within 180 days of property transfer. The applicant must not be liable for the contamination at the site or affiliated with a potentially responsible party. If you have any questions about your specific site eligibility status, please reach out to EPA during this process, and we'll help guide you through the eligibility. Next slide, please. So cleanup grants also require a community notification and public meeting portion for the threshold criteria. This can be done via a local newspaper within the target community and must be completed no later than 2 weeks before the application is submitted. So the latest date you can notify the public this round is January 14th if you submit the application on the deadline date. We don't recommend waiting that long, but that's the latest you can perform this. If you submit your application earlier than the deadline, then the community notification must be earlier as well. The notification must include a full copy of the application, where it is located, and the date, time, and location of the public meeting that will be held. Next slide, please. So for this public meeting, it could be in person or virtual. We just want to give the public a chance to respond and comment on this application. So the draft application must be discussed during the meeting and the public must be given an opportunity to provide comments. So when you submit the application altogether, it is required to include a copy of the community notification, so such as the newspaper advertisement that you used. You must include meeting notes of the public meeting, the participant list, the public comments, and the response to them if you received them, or state that you did not receive any public comments during the public meeting. Next slide, please. So the guidelines within the NOFO might seem a little daunting. So Mid-Atlantic Tab put together a really great infographic that helps lay out the different site eligibility routes for your hazardous or petroleum contaminated sites. So if you're a first-time applicant, giving this a read through before diving straight into the guidelines can help you understand how your site will pass the threshold criteria. So I highly recommend checking this out before you begin your application. Next slide, please. And there's also an assessment grant infographic that'll help to break down the threshold criteria from the guidelines too. So highly recommend looking at both of these, depending which grant you'll go into. And now I'll pass it off to Dawn.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending this webinar. I'm going to talk about some of the changes that we're seeing to the Multipurpose Assessment and Cleanup Grant guidelines from fiscal year 25 for assessment and cleanup and from fiscal year 24 for the multipurpose grants. Next slide. Thank you. I'm going to go through some of these changes. This is not all of these changes. So if you take anything away from this section, make sure that you access this link once you get a copy of the slides, because this will have a summary of all of the changes. We'll talk high level. This link is also provided on every single one of the slides. So if you have questions at the end of this that you don't ask during our presentations, please use that link to look at those changes for fiscal year 26. First, we're going to talk about changes to all of the grants. So this year, EPA has started using a more streamlined Notice of Funding Opportunities template, which I think is an improvement over previous years. The information has been rearranged a little bit into different sections. So if you've applied in the past, if you've received a grant in the past, we always recommend everyone read the new guidelines because things may have changed. They may end up in different locations. And if you just sort of recycle the same information, you may not get as high of a score as you could because you're not answering all the questions or you're not answering them in the right locations. Also, make sure that you review updated language and requirements to align with our current administrative priorities. And there's also some clarification for most of the grants other than cleanup about how nonprofit organizations who are exempt from taxation under Section 501c4 may be eligible to apply. The key is that if you are a 501c4 organization and you lobby the federal government, you are not eligible to apply for a grant. And there's more details included about some of the other limitations. There's also a sample format for a budget table that's provided in the guidelines. There are a few different tables throughout those guidelines that they recommend that you use in your application. If you can use them and they make sense, that's helpful because we see a little bit more consistency across applications. Next slide, please. Now we'll talk about assessment grants specifically. Okay, so I'm going to go back to something that Catherine spoke about a little bit as I go through these discussion points, but those eligibility charts are really, really helpful. So those are the charts that she spoke about where it looks at if you can apply for multiple grants, but the second one is if you already have a grant, can you apply for another grant? Excuse me. In this case, the community-wide assessment grants for states and tribes. Sometimes you'll hear us say CWAG street grants. You must meet a 60% drawdown requirement for each CWAG street grant to apply for funding under this solicitation. All of these drawdowns would have had to be completed by October 1st, 2025 to be eligible. If you have a current assessment or multi-purpose grant and you want to apply for a community-wide assessment grant, you must have met the 70% drawdown requirement by October 1st, 2025 to apply. On each of these slides, we also provided a breakdown of how many points are in each section and also the maximum number of points each application can receive for this grant type. So that's something to note as you go through, but as a reminder, we spoke about a little bit in the threshold criteria section. If there's a question or a request for information, make sure that you address that in your application to get the most points possible. If it's not applicable to your organization or project, please make a note that it's not applicable and why. Or if you weren't able to find the information, but you've substituted other information, for example, if you are from a small community, maybe you don't have community detailed census data or other information, if you used a little bit larger area, just make sure that you note that. That way we know you looked at the criteria, you looked at that specific request, and you attempted to answer the question as best you could. You didn't just skip it. That's a big key for us in reviewing these applications. Next slide, please. For assessment coalition grants, going back to our table of anticipated funding, there are awards available up to $1.5 million. If you have an open award for a community-wide assessment grant for states and tribes, you are not eligible to apply for an assessment coalition grant. But there have been some previous limitations on the eligible entities to apply that have been lifted this year. So now the list of entities eligible is the same for both lead and non-lead coalition members. In the past, there have been some different requirements. If you have a current assessment or multi-purpose grant and you're interested in applying for an assessment coalition grant, you must have met that 70% drawdown requirement on your current grant by October 1st, 2025 to apply. And also these coalition target areas may not overlap, and the target areas must be in at least 3 distinct municipalities or jurisdictions. So it can be 3 different towns, 3 different cities or tribes, but you need to make sure you have those distinct areas and that the members of your coalition represent those. Again, we have the point percentage distribution. As you'll note, the maximum number of points available for scoring your application can change depending on the type of grant you're applying for. Okay, next slide, please. And now we'll talk about the multi-purpose grants. Okay, so again, with this eligibility, if you have an open CWAG Street community-wide assessment grant for states and tribes, you are not eligible to apply for multi-purpose grant funding. If you currently have an assessment or another multi-purpose grant and you want to apply for funding, you have to have met that 70% drawdown requirement by October 1st. Again, all of this is in those eligibility charts that Catherine spoke about earlier. And again, we have that point percentage distribution for different sections. So keep in mind that if one has a lot higher percentage, you might want to spend a little bit more time, a few more words on that section. But in general, I'm just going to say answer all of the questions. And again, maximum number of points for this section is 165. Or sorry, this grant application, not section. Next slide, please. And now we'll talk about cleanup grants. Okay, so Chris spoke about this already a little bit earlier. We're probably going to talk about it again when the states come in and tell us what's going on, what they need for their state eligibility letters. But the key for the cleanup grant is that in that state eligibility letter, they're going to say one of 2 things related to your site characterization. Either you have sufficient characterization and assessment performed on that site that you're ready for remediation, or that you don't have enough assessment completed as of now. However, that will happen before June 15th, 2026. In the past, we've had similar statements to that, but in this case, we are now asking applicants to affirm that a sufficient level of characterization will be performed by June 15th, 2026. So we need that affirmative statement in addition to the information provided in the state letter. Again, West Virginia DEP will talk about it a little bit more in their section, but that is a key change that we want to make sure that you all note. So if you don't have enough assessment completed to start remediation, that you will have that completed by June 15th, 2026. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, if you are currently a multi-purpose grant recipient and you want to apply for a cleanup grant, you need to meet that 70% drawdown requirement by October 1st. And again, you can see the breakdown of the different sections and percentage of points. The maximum number of points you can earn on a cleanup grant application is a little bit higher than some of the others because we have some additional sections. So keep that in mind as you're working on your application. And again, link at the bottom of all of these pages for a complete list of the guidelines that have changed between fiscal year 25 and 26. Okay, next slide. Okay, we're going to take a little break for some questions if anyone has them. You can either enter your questions in the chat if you want to just type something in. You can also raise your hand and we can take yourself off mute and ask a question. You can type them in the chat throughout the whole presentation and we'll try to answer those as we go or at the end. And we'll also stay on at the end if there are additional questions after. So just a second, any questions? Okay, then I'm going to pass it over to West Virginia DEP to take over the next section.
Thanks, Dawn. So Jennifer Little and I will be discussing some of the additional information that's necessary to be included with the grant narrative. Next slide, please. If you've applied in the past, or if you've even just reviewed the guidelines in the past, something new this year is just naming the narrative information sheet to something a little bit different called the application information sheet, but it's 100% the same. It's the same information that's necessary, which includes that it has to be written on the applicant's official letterhead. It's all general information like the applicant's name and address, your website if you have one, which grant you're applying for and how much funding you're applying for, your location. And then per the assessment and cleanup guidelines, you have to identify certain target areas or priority sites. And those just can be listed in the application information sheet, whereas the narrative, you're really going into where the site is located, why it's a good site, good brownfield site for your application, et cetera. Include your key contacts and then the population within each of your target areas or where your sites are located in the towns or cities. And then include the other factors checklist. And that is specifically written to the guidelines. And you'll just want to make sure you read through that and include that other factors checklist in the application information sheet. It is slightly different for each grant. So just make sure you really review that in the guidelines. And that you're including that letter from the state environmental agency, which is the West Virginia DEP. Either I can provide that letter or Jennifer Little can provide that letter, which she will be discussing here in the next few slides. And then you'll just have to mark the box about releasing copies of applications onto EPA's website or agree to do that. Next slide, please. And note the page limits, and I should have said this on the application information sheet, but that is limited to 3 pages. If you go one sentence onto page 4, that will not be reviewed. So please make sure you are meeting those page limits for either the application information sheet or the narrative, that it is single-spaced and 12-point font, and you're limited to using kind of the common fonts like Times New Roman, Arial, Calibri, and that it is a 12-point font size. Again, for cleanup and assessment grants, you have a 10-page limit in your narrative. And again, if you go on, just a few words or a couple sentences onto page 11, that will not be reviewed and could limit your points with your ranking criteria. And then the multi-purpose grant, because it's a little bit more in depth, that does provide, EPA provides 2 extra pages. So you have a 12-page limit, but again, same font, single-spaced and 12-point font, Times New Roman, Arial, or Calibri. The narrative includes these ranking criteria that we've talked a little bit more about, and again, all of that is in the guidelines. You just need to read through and make sure you are answering sufficiently each part of that ranking criteria. We've applied, DEP has applied for several assessment grants, and I literally highlight each thing that I know I need to provide really adequate responses to in the guidelines and make sure that is really covered in your narrative. The main components are the project description and the plan for revitalization, and that includes, your target areas, your brownfield sites, and your plan for reuse and revitalization. And then that dovetails into the community need for the grant and community engagement, and that's a big piece for your narrative. Where the entities that will be providing support for your application and the project throughout the years of the performance period, and naming those community organizations within that specific item 2 in your narrative. And then EPA has provided really nice table format for your task descriptions, cost estimates, and how to measure your outputs and outcomes and measuring that specific progress. And then section 4 is programmatic capability and past performance. And if you've had any sort of federal grants, make sure you're looking through the guidelines and responding appropriately so that you can maximize your number of points throughout all of that ranking criteria. Make sure you are addressing all the threshold criteria responses adequately, and then include that other factors and considerations just in case EPA needs that during their review. And again, EPA only evaluates either that 3-page application information sheet or those 10 or 12 pages of in your narrative. So please make sure you're sticking just to the required page limits, and as well as just getting your state environmental authority letter. And it's not encouraged to seek support letters from your legislators or from your state or Congress. Or any other, city letters or city manager letters, mayor letters, anything like that. Just stick to what is required. But just remember that you have to have a state environmental authority letter from the West Virginia DEP. Next slide. And Jen is going to take it over from here.
Thank you, Erin. Go ahead, if you don't mind, to the next slide. In this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about if you are eligible to be in the volunteer remediation program or not. And you must have enough data collection and information about the site to be able to enter the program and be ready to submit for the cleanup grants. And what the important information, I think, is highlighted in red here, that these important dates you don't want to forget. I've heard several times, again, January 14th is the deadline we want to receive these requests so that we have time to review the assessments that have been done on the site and make sure that you are eligible for this grant. As well as remember that the June 15th date that was mentioned for 2026, if you don't have all of the data that you need to have collected. Sites are not eligible for the voluntary remediation program if there is not a significant amount of data collected, and you must get this letter submitted to us in time. So put those dates on your calendar and don't forget, and reach out to us if you have some questions. Next slide, please. Make sure that you attach the letter to your application. You may use the same letter for multiple applications, but make sure that you put it in both of them. Again, we're making sure we have enough site assessment information to make a determination, and that you've made it clear. And you may not use a previous letter, which Chris also told you earlier. So here's the important stuff as well. So we've got these important dates to put on your calendar, but save the email address so that Erin and I can be able to review these, as well as on the second bullet on the right, that will get you directly to where you can submit for our support letters. So don't forget, January 14th is really important, and we look forward to working with you. Go ahead, next slide. I will pass on. I'm not sure who's next.
That's me. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you,
All
Catherine.
right, so just a little bit of remaining key information. So if we want to go to the next slide. Okay, so when you go to submit your application, you have to have some specific federal forms. So application for federal assistance, this is SF424, budget information for non-construction programs, SF424A, EPA key contacts form 5700-54, and then the pre-award compliance report. So these are all available online. You see in the purple there at the bottom, there's a link to that. When you get these slides, you'll be able to follow that link and find the most updated versions of these. Also in that blue text there, right above that, EPA has provided like a great template that shows you exactly how to fill out all of these forms. So go to that link, take a look if you have any questions about those forms. That will tell you like exactly which boxes to fill out, and if there's nothing, put a 0 here or whatever. So that is a really great resource. I highly recommend that. And then the final thing you're going to attach is the project narrative attachment form, and that includes everything that Erin and Jen were just talking about. That includes your 10 or 12-page narrative for whichever grant you're applying for. It includes your state authority letter. It includes your draft analysis of brownfields cleanup alternative. All of those things get attached as one single PDF file and submitted that way, all through grants.gov. So next slide, please. Okay, so if you have applied in the past, like say you applied last year and you were not successful, hopefully you did a grant debrief with EPA and they went through and showed you what were the strengths and weaknesses of your application. If you did that and you're applying again this year, please refer to that. Don't just resubmit the same application. You're not going to be successful. As Dawn was saying earlier, right, there have been changes to the structure, the outline of the applications. So you want to make sure that you're referring to that debrief, taking that feedback and integrating it into your application. You're adapting your application for the new outline. And this year, if you are unsuccessful in your application, make sure you request a grant debrief from EPA so that you can go back and apply again next year with a better understanding of where you can improve your application. Next slide, please. All right, and finally, when in doubt, check the FAQs. Again, this is a hyperlink here to a document online, the FAQs. I took a look at this. This FAQ document is almost twice as long as the actual grant guidelines. So there is a ton of information in here. If there's any questions that you have that you're not finding the answer to in the NOFO, chances are there may be an answer in the FAQ document. So please take a look at that for any questions that come up. And of course, reach out to Tab as well. So next slide. All right, we'll pause here for any questions. Please put them in the chat or bring yourself off mute if you have any questions.
Hey, Catherine, that sample link, was that in a presentation that they're being provided?
Yes. Yeah. So these slides will all be sent out to everybody, and that sample link is just right in there. We can probably drop it in the, I think I still have it here. I'll drop it in the chat also. Okay, so there's the link for that sample form. All right, I'm not hearing any other questions, so we can go ahead and move on. And I think Katie is going to close us out here.
Thanks, Catherine. If you do come up with any questions, continue to add them to the chat if that would be helpful. So we just want to remind you how we can help throughout this process. Next slide, please. So we've covered a lot of how we can help you now during the grant process, and we are absolutely here. So if I jump down to resource identification, we can assist you with grant writing. We cannot write your grant for you. We can also provide a review of the grant. So if you've started to draft your grant application and you would like another set of eyes, please reach out to us. We would be happy to do so. Also throughout the year, so if you go back to the top bullet, we talk about brownfield education. There's a variety of ways that we can help you and your community better understand brownfields, not only what they are and where they are, but how you can turn them into opportunities. And we do so with examples such as webinars and also events. So you may see us at a variety of events throughout the state, and we try to tag along if it makes sense for us to do so. And again, get some training out there. And also, let's not forget about our Brownfield Conference that's held in September of each year. Local brownfield program support. So again, if you're not quite sure where those brownfields are in your community, we can help you with the inventory preparation. So you have an idea of where they are, and then you can start to actually prepare a plan for how to tackle them. We can questions on sites, general questions. There is never a silly question. So if you have a question that seems somewhat remotely brownfield related, never hesitate to reach out to us. And then also we can provide some design assistance through our partnership with WVU and also the Virginia Tech Design Assistance Center. Next slide, please. Important deadlines. I know Jen was touching on them a lot. So we ask that if you would like us to review your grant, please submit it to us no later than January 16th to allow us enough time to provide a thorough review. In some situations, depending on the number of applications that we are reviewing, we have the opportunity to review twice. Sometimes, you know, that can work out, again, depending on the complexity. So, you know, if that's needed, then we may be able to help like that. Again, January 14th for the DEP deadline, so keep that in mind. And then, of course, the big deadline is January 28th for the actual application. Please do not wait until the last minute, as my husband would do. Next slide. Here's the contact information. You have email addresses for Aaron and Jen, as well as for Chris and Don with the EPA. Aaron and Jen have provided a little bit of information about how they can help you. Again, you learned more about it, but this just kind of captures that. The EPA is limited now in how they can help you since the grant is actually open. So they right now can help with threshold criteria questions, but outside of the grant period, please reach out to your EPA project officers. They are wonderful resources. Next slide. We here at TAB are available to help in almost any way. So please, again, don't hesitate to reach out. We can be your first step if you're not quite sure where to direct the question. We welcome it. Please just reach out to us. Next slide. And here's our contact information, our phone number, email address. Sign up for the newsletter if you are not already signed up. And then you also have the ability to click on that link that says individual consultation. And that will bring up calendars for, I believe, just Carrie and myself for right now. There may be some others, but that allows you to actually visually see our availability and schedule a time with us.